They ignored me for a decade, leaving my letters unopened and my calls unanswered. Now, with suitcases in hand, my daughter's family stood on my oceanfront doorstep, smiles as false as their sudden concern. I had built a new life by the Pacific, free of their betrayal, yet here they were, eyeing my wealth. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The Pacific waves rolled beneath my terrace with their eternal rhythm. Coffee steam rose from my favorite mug, the one with the faded Stanford logo that somehow survived 40 years of faculty meetings. Seagulls circled overhead, their cries mixing with salt air and the distant hum of Malibu traffic. 3 weeks in this house, and I finally felt peace settling into my bones. The doorbell shattered that tranquility like glass. I set down the mug, hands steady despite the sudden tension coiling in my chest. Who could it be? The mailman never rang. Neighbors kept to themselves in this stretch of coastline. My pulse quickened as I walked through the living room, past unpacked boxes still waiting for attention. Through the peephole, I saw them. Suitcases, multiple pieces stacked behind 3 familiar figures I hadn't seen in 10 years. My breath caught. Fern stood closest to the door, fidgeting with her purse strap, that same nervous habit from childhood. Ward loomed behind her, shoulders squared with false confidence, already scanning my property with calculating eyes. And there, barely visible behind his parents, stood a lanky teenager who could only be Wiley. My grandson, 16 now, probably. A stranger. I opened the door, forcing my expression into neutrality. "Dad Abner," Ward's voice boomed with rehearsed enthusiasm. "We heard about your new place and thought we'd check how you're settling in." Fern stepped forward, her smile too bright, too desperate. "Papa, you look wonderful. Doesn't he look wonderful, honey?" Ward nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. The sea air must be working miracles." I studied their faces. Older, more worn than I remembered. Fern's designer handbag looked genuine, but her shoes showed wear at the heels. Ward's suit fit well, but bore the subtle signs of careful maintenance rather than recent purchase. And Wiley. He hung back, phone clutched in his hands like a shield, stealing glances at me with curious, uncertain eyes. "Well," I said finally, "this is unexpected." "We should have called," Fern rushed to explain. "But you know how crazy life gets, and we were just driving up the coast for Ward's business meeting, and Wiley said, 'Are you really my grandfather?'" The boy's voice barely rose above a whisper. The question hit harder than I expected. 10 years of silence, 10 years of returned letters and ignored calls, and he didn't even know me. I looked at his face, so much like his father at that age, but with Fern's sensitive eyes. "Yes," I said quietly. "I am." Ward cleared his throat. "Listen, Dad, we feel terrible about losing touch. Business has been absolutely insane, moving from city to city." 37 moves in 10 years, I interrupted, surprising myself with the bitterness in my voice. I counted, each forwarding address, each returned Christmas card. Fern's smile faltered. "Papa, you understand it's dangerous living alone in such a big house at your age? We've been so worried." "Have you?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Ocean waves crashed below, counting seconds of awkwardness. Ward's eyes continued their inventory. Crystal chandelier, hardwood floors, the view that must be worth millions. Fern twisted her purse strap tighter. Wiley studied his phone screen with desperate intensity. "Well," I stepped aside, "come in then. Let's see how far you'll go." We settled into my living room like actors taking their marks. Ward chose the chair with the best view of the ocean and the clearest sight lines to appraise my furnishings. Fern perched on the sofa's edge, ready to spring into conversation. Wiley slouched in the corner chair, still clutching his phone, but stealing glances around the room with teenage curiosity. "This place is incredible," Ward began, his tone shifting to casual assessment mode. "The market value alone must be—" "We don't need to discuss that," I cut him off. "Of course not," Fern jumped in. "We're just so happy you're comfortable. After Mother died, we worried constantly about you rattling around in that old faculty house." Mother? She called my Eleanor Mother now, as if claiming kinship retroactively could erase the decade of absence. Eleanor died 3 years ago, surrounded by her garden club friends and the neighbors who had actually cared. Not one of them had attended the funeral. "We were so busy with work," Fern continued, her voice growing higher with desperation. You know how crazy life gets when Ward's consulting business took off, moving constantly, different time zones. Communication is hard these days, Ward added smoothly. Technology changes so fast, email addresses shifting with every move. I watched them construct their elaborate edifice of excuses. Each word felt calculated, rehearsed. In my mind, I saw the stack of returned letters on Eleanor's desk, her tears as she rewrapped Christmas presents that would never be opened. The birthday cards she'd insisted on sending until the year they came back marked addressee unknown. We tried calling, Fern said, but the numbers we had were the same for 40 years. My voice stayed level, but something cold settled behind my ribs. Same house, same phone, same address. Until Eleanor's funeral. Wiley looked up from his phone. Grandma died? The innocent question hit like a physical blow. This boy, my only grandchild, didn't even know his grandmother had existed, much less died. I studied his face, searching for traces of Eleanor's gentle humor, her quick intelligence. She did, I said softly. She would have loved meeting you. We meant to bring Wiley sooner, Ward interjected quickly. But teenage schedules, you know, school, sports, friends. What sports do you play? I asked Wiley directly. He shifted uncomfortably. I used to try soccer, but we moved too much to stay on teams. Another casualty of their restless lifestyle. I remembered my own father teaching me baseball in the backyard. The stability of growing up in one place, building relationships that lasted. These people had stolen that from my grandson, made him a perpetual outsider. The important thing, Fern said quickly, is that we're here now. Families should be together, especially as we get older. Her perfume drifted across the room, different from what she'd worn as a young woman, but expensive. Everything about them screamed careful presentation, masking desperation. Ward's shoes were polished but worn, Fern's jewelry genuine but outdated. They needed something, and they thought I was foolish enough not to see it. How long are you planning to stay? I asked. Well, Ward exchanged a glance with Fern. We thought maybe a week or two, just to reconnect, let Wiley get to know his grandfather. If that's all right, Fern added hastily. We don't want to impose, but family is so important at our age, don't you think? At our age. As if we were peers now, as if the decades of abandonment could be erased by proximity and false concern. Of course, I said. Family is everything. At 5 o'clock, I excused myself for a rest, leaving them to settle into the guest bedrooms. Ward immediately began discussing Wi-Fi passwords and morning coffee preferences, already claiming territory with practiced ease. I climbed the stairs to my study, each step carrying me further from their performance of familial concern. My private sanctuary overlooked the Pacific through floor-to-ceiling windows. Investment portfolios lay scattered across the mahogany desk, Berkshire Hathaway statements, tech stock certificates, real estate holdings that had quintupled in value since Eleanor's death. Awards lined the walls, distinguished service from Stanford, consulting honors from Fortune 500 companies, recognition from 3 decades of financial strategy that had built our comfortable retirement. Photographs crowned the bookshelf, Eleanor and me at faculty parties, vacation shots from Europe, pictures of the life we'd built together. One frame held Fern's college graduation photo, back when she still called every Sunday. Another showed a chubby-cheeked toddler I barely recognized as Wiley, sent years ago with a brief note promising more visits that never came. I settled into my leather chair and listened. Their voices carried through the old house's thin walls, growing more animated as they explored their temporary domain. Did you see the kitchen? Fern's voice drifted up from below. Those appliances must have cost more than our car. The location alone puts this place in the 8-figure range, Ward replied. Oceanfront Malibu, private beach access, established neighborhood. Shh, he might hear you. He's 70, not deaf. Besides, someone needs to think practically about his situation. I leaned back, assembling the picture. They hadn't come to reconnect. They'd come to assess my worth, to position themselves for inheritance conversations. The suitcases made sense now. They planned to stay long enough to work their particular magic, to convince a lonely old man to restructure his finances for his loving family's benefit. 10 years of silence, and they thought I'd forgotten how to read people. My phone buzzed, a text from my neighbor Goldie. Saw your company arriving? Everything okay? I smiled, typing back. Just family catching up. Family. The word felt bitter now, loaded with expectations and obligations I'd supposedly neglected. But as I watched the sun paint golden patterns on my investment statements, a different feeling began to stir. Not hurt, not anger exactly, but something sharper, more purposeful. They wanted to play games with a wealthy old man's finances. They assumed grief and loneliness had made me vulnerable to manipulation. Let them think that. I opened my laptop and began reviewing my accounts. Liquid assets, property values, investment portfolios, all the tools I'd need for what was forming in my mind. Not revenge exactly, but education. A teaching moment about consequences and assumptions. Through the window, waves continued their eternal rhythm, but inside my head, a different tide was turning. For 10 years, I'd been the victim of their abandonment. Starting tomorrow, I'd be something else entirely. But first, I had a performance to give. 2 hours later, I emerged from my study with the careful shuffle of a man overwhelmed by sudden joy. My hand trembled slightly as I gripped the banister. Nothing theatrical, just enough uncertainty to suggest age catching up with emotion. They'd scattered throughout my house like tourists claiming territory. Ward stood before my Monet reproduction, head tilted in appraisal mode. Fern had unpacked efficiently in the guest room, her movements visible through the open door. Wiley hunched on the terrace, phone screen casting blue light across his teenage features. "Family dinner," I announced, letting my voice catch slightly. I haven't cooked for anyone but myself in, well, too long. The kitchen became my stage. I'd prepared most of the meal earlier: rosemary lamb, roasted vegetables, a bottle of Bordeaux that cost more than most people's rent. But now I performed the finale with deliberate imperfection. My hands shook as I carved the meat, just enough to seem genuine. I dropped a serving spoon, muttered about my clumsiness. "Let me help," Ward offered immediately, already assessing the Sub-Zero refrigerator, the marble countertops, the copper pots hanging like expensive jewelry. "Such a kind boy," I said, using the diminutive deliberately. "Eleanor always said you had good instincts." Fern appeared in the doorway, guilt flickering across her features. "Papa, this smells wonderful. When did you learn to cook like this?" "Necessity," I replied, arranging place settings with slight trembles. "After Eleanor. Well, a man learns, or he starves." The dining room overlooked the Pacific, where sunset painted the sky in shades that matched the wine. I'd positioned the family photographs strategically. Eleanor and me, at various stages of prosperity. Awards ceremonies, vacation shots that suggested comfortable wealth accumulated over decades. "This is incredible," Wiley said, taking his first bite of lamb. "Genuine appreciation, not performance. The boy might be salvageable." "Your grandmother's recipe," I told him, watching his face process information about a woman he'd never known existed. "She would have adored you." Ward raised his glass. "To family reunions long overdue." We drank, and I let silence settle between us like dust. Strategic pauses often revealed more than direct questions. Ward couldn't help himself. His eyes kept cataloging, estimating, calculating. The crystal glasses, the silver service, the casual way I'd opened wine worth $1,000. "Abner," he began, voice carefully modulated. "How are you managing? Really, I mean. This house, the upkeep, being alone." Perfect opening. I set down my fork with deliberate care, as if gathering strength for difficult truths. "Some days are harder than others," I admitted. "The finances, Eleanor handled so much. Investment statements, tax planning, estate management. I'm still learning to navigate it all." Fern leaned forward. "Papa, you don't have to manage everything alone anymore. We're here now." "Are you?" The question escaped before I could soften it. I forced vulnerability into my expression, let them see an old man's desperate hope. "For how long this time?" The guilt hit Fern like a physical blow. Ward's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, annoyance at emotional complications interfering with business assessments. "We're not going anywhere," Ward said firmly. "Family takes care of family. That's what we do." "What you do," I thought, "is abandon family for 10 years, then return when inheritance becomes relevant." But I nodded gratefully, letting tears gather in my eyes. "I've dreamed of this evening for so long," I whispered. "Family together at last." The performance was working perfectly. Morning light filtered through the terrace doors as I prepared breakfast, having risen at 6 with old man's precision. Ward appeared first, drawn by coffee aromas and the opportunity to examine my property in daylight. He'd dressed casually, but maintained that assessing posture, eyes calculating the value of everything from the espresso machine to the ocean view. "Beautiful morning," he said, stepping onto the terrace where $1,000 outdoor furniture framed the Pacific like a postcard. "Every morning here is a gift," I replied, pouring his coffee into a mug that happened to bear the Goldman Sachs logo, a subtle reminder of my financial sophistication. Fern emerged 20 minutes later, apologizing for oversleeping. Stress exhaustion, I diagnosed silently, watching her pale complexion and the way she clutched her coffee cup like salvation. Wiley stumbled out last, teenager schedule intact, earbuds trailing from his phone. "Sleep well?" I asked each of them, noting Ward's quick nod, Fern's forced smile, Wiley's grunt of acknowledgement. Breakfast became Ward's interrogation, dressed as concern. He helped himself to cereal, orange juice, the casual familiarity of someone already claiming territory. "This setup must cost a fortune to maintain," he observed, gesturing toward the infinity pool, the professional landscaping, the private beach access below. "Property taxes alone in this area." "Manageable," I said carefully. Eleanor's life insurance was substantial. Stanford professors had excellent benefits in those days. A calculated lie. The insurance had covered funeral expenses, and little more. My wealth came from decades of careful investing, the compound interest of starting early and thinking long-term. But Ward didn't need those details yet. "Still, at your age," Ward pressed forward, "have you considered downsizing? Something more practical, easier to manage?" Fern shot him a warning look. Too aggressive, too soon. But I pretended not to notice, instead looking wistful as I gazed across the water. "This was Eleanor's dream house," I said softly. "We bought it just before she got sick. Moving feels like abandoning her memory." "Of course," Ward backtracked smoothly. "I just meant, practically speaking, the maintenance, the isolation." "I'm not isolated," I interrupted, showing the first hint of the man beneath the vulnerable facade. "I have Goldie next door. My investment advisor visits monthly, the gardening service." "Investment advisor?" Ward's interest sharpened. "Anyone I might know? I work in financial consulting myself." Time to feed his hunger. I walked to the kitchen counter where I had left yesterday's mail, including a statement from Merrill Lynch that showed 7 figures across multiple accounts. Not my complete portfolio, but enough to make Ward's pulse quicken. "Marcus handles most of it," I said, leaving the statement visible as I reached for more coffee. "Though I probably should simplify. All these different accounts, the real estate holdings, the municipal bonds Eleanor insisted on." Ward's eyes locked onto the numbers. His breathing changed subtly, the predator scenting prey. "Real estate holdings?" Fern asked. "Besides this house?" 3 rental properties in Santa Monica, a condo in Aspen, some commercial space downtown, I listed casually, as if discussing groceries. Eleanor believed in diversification. The silence stretched as they processed this information. Ward's expression had shifted from casual interest to barely controlled excitement. Fern looked stunned, probably calculating how much debt this kind of wealth could eliminate. Only Wiley seemed unaffected, lost in teenage concerns and social media notifications. "Grandfather," he said suddenly, "can I see the beach?" The innocent question broke the tension. I smiled genuinely for the first time in days. "Of course. There's a path through the garden." As he wandered off, Ward moved closer to where the statement lay open. "Abner, you really shouldn't leave financial documents lying around." By evening, I'd prepared my most elaborate performance yet. The dining room table gleamed with Eleanor's finest china, crystal that caught candlelight like trapped stars, silver service that had belonged to her grandmother. I'd spent the day cooking, cleaning, arranging, the devoted grandfather grateful for his family's presence. But I'd also left my laptop open on the side table, displaying my complete financial portfolio. Ward noticed immediately, his eyes drawn to the screen like a moth to flame. The numbers were staggering. Liquid assets exceeding 10 million, real estate worth another 8, investment accounts that most people could only dream of accumulating. Papa, you shouldn't leave this open, Fern said, reaching to close the laptop. Leave it, I said, settling into my chair with theatrical weariness. You might as well see what you're dealing with, what I'm dealing with. The admission hung in the air between us. Ward's mask had completely dropped now, his businessman's mind calculating possibilities. Fern looked torn between guilt and opportunity. Wiley glanced up from his phone, finally sensing the tension that had been building for 2 days. I suppose you have questions, I continued, pouring wine with hands that no longer trembled. The vulnerability act was over for tonight. About where all this came from. We're just concerned about you managing it alone, Ward said, his voice tight with poorly concealed hunger. I laughed, a dry sound that made Fern flinch. Concerned. Yes, I imagine you are. The story I told them was carefully crafted truth mixed with strategic fiction. Eleanor's modest inheritance became substantial. My conservative investments became aggressive speculation that paid off handsomely. The house we'd bought as elderly dreamers became a calculated real estate acquisition. After Eleanor died, I threw myself into financial planning, I explained. What else did I have to do? No family calling, no grandchildren to spoil, just spreadsheets and market analyses. Each word was a small knife, designed to cut deep enough to draw blood, but not deep enough to end the relationship prematurely. The lawyers keep asking about estate planning, I continued. Beneficiaries, tax strategies, charitable giving. I tell them I have a daughter somewhere, a grandson I've never met. They suggest I might want to reconsider my options. Ward leaned forward. What kind of options? Living trusts, foundation work, structured giving. I waved my hand dismissively. Complex stuff. They say at my age, I should be thinking about legacy, about what happens to all this when I'm gone. Fern's face had gone pale. Papa, don't talk like that. Why not? I'm 65, Fern. Eleanor died at 62. Every day is borrowed time at this point. The silence that followed was electric with possibility. I could practically hear Ward's mind racing through scenarios, calculating inheritance timelines, estimating his family's potential windfall. The thing about money, I said, raising my glass, is that it's meaningless without family to share it with. Eleanor knew that. She always said wealth without love is just expensive loneliness. You're not alone anymore, Ward said quickly. We're here now. Are you? I asked again, the same question from last night, but with different weight behind it. For how long? Until the next business opportunity calls you to another city? Until Wiley graduates and you decide to relocate again? We could stay, Fern said suddenly. Wiley could finish high school here. Ward could work remotely more often. Ward nodded eagerly. Absolutely. Family first, always. I smiled, letting them see the grateful old man they wanted to believe in. But behind that smile, my real plan was just beginning. Dawn barely touched the horizon when muffled voices pulled me from sleep. Years of faculty meetings had trained me to wake at irregular sounds, but this felt different, urgent, conspiratorial. The voices came from the guest bedroom, separated from mine by a thin wall that had probably seemed adequate to the house's original architect. I slipped from bed barefoot, my phone already in hand. Muscle memory from decades of early morning conference calls guided me through darkness toward the sound. The hardwood floor creaked once under my weight, and I froze. The voices continued. They hadn't heard me. Positioning myself against the shared wall, I activated my phone's recording function. Technology had evolved since my teaching days, but I'd kept pace. Stanford professors who couldn't adapt to new tools didn't survive long in academia. Ward's voice came through clearly, stripped of the charm he performed for my benefit. He's clearly losing his edge, Ward said with cold satisfaction. Did you see how confused he got about those investment terms yesterday? Perfect timing for us to step in. I still feel terrible about this, Fern whispered, but without real conviction. Feel terrible about what? Helping your father manage his finances before he loses everything to some scam artist? We're doing him a favor. A pause. Fabric rustled, someone shifting position on the bed. Do you think he'll actually sign the papers? Fern asked. He will if we handle this right. Medical evaluation first. Get a doctor to document cognitive decline. Then the lawyers can argue he needs financial guardianship for his own protection. My breath caught. Medical evaluation. Cognitive decline. They'd researched this thoroughly. What about Wiley? Fern's voice carried motherly concern. He likes his grandfather. This might upset him. Wiley will understand when we're not living paycheck to paycheck anymore, Ward replied harshly. When we can afford his college tuition without taking out more loans. When we're not dodging calls from credit companies. So, there it was, the desperation I'd sensed beneath their polished presentation. Ward's business hadn't just hit rough patches. They were drowning. The timing has to be perfect, Ward continued. We need him dependent on us, grateful for our help. Keep playing the concerned family angle until we can get legal documentation in place. He seemed so happy last night, Fern said softly. When he was talking about legacy, about what happens to his money. Exactly. He's practically begging someone to take control. We just need to be patient. Let him convince himself this is his idea. I pressed closer to the wall, ensuring my phone captured every word. This recording would be insurance, evidence of premeditation should I need it later. How long do you think we have? Fern asked. A few weeks, maybe a month. We can't rush this. If he gets suspicious, everything falls apart. But our credit situation. Ward's voice trailed off ominously. I know. The payments are due next month. Fern, listen to me. This isn't just about money anymore. If we don't solve our debt problem, we lose the house, Wiley's school, everything. Your father is our only option. The desperation in Ward's voice told me everything I needed to know about their financial situation. They weren't just opportunistic. They were desperate enough to destroy family relationships for survival. What if he figures out what we're doing? Fern whispered. Ward laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Look at him, Fern. Yesterday he needed help opening a wine bottle. He's a lonely old man who wants to believe his family loves him. We give him that fantasy, and in return, we solve our problems. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. They'd studied me, cataloged my vulnerabilities, planned their manipulation with business-like precision. But they'd made one critical error. They'd underestimated exactly who they were trying to manipulate. After the family finished breakfast, I announced my intention to take a morning walk. Doctor's orders for an old man's circulation, I explained, with appropriate self-deprecation. Ward nodded approvingly, probably pleased to see me embracing age-appropriate activities. The coastal path stretched for miles in both directions, but I only needed privacy for phone calls. Once beyond sight of the house, I dialed my attorney. Marcus, it's Abner Grant. I need to discuss some estate planning modifications. Of course. What specifically are we addressing? Asset protection strategies. I may have some family members who are overly interested in my financial well-being. Marcus had handled complex wealth preservation cases for 30 years. He understood immediately. How soon do you need the documentation prepared? Within the week, I'll email you the details this afternoon. Understood. Should we schedule a meeting at your house? Not yet. I'll come to your office when I'm ready. For now, just prepare the paperwork. My second call was to my investment advisor, establishing new security protocols and verbal passwords. The third went to my doctor, scheduling a comprehensive cognitive assessment, on my terms, not Ward's. Walking back along the beach, I spotted Goldie Ferguson tending her prize-winning roses next door. Perfect timing. Abner, how are you enjoying your family visit? I approached her garden gate, adopting the expression of a man carrying burdens. Goldie, could I speak with you privately? I need advice from someone I trust. Her sharp eyes assessed my demeanor immediately. Come in, coffee's fresh. Goldie's kitchen overlooked my property through bay windows perfectly positioned for neighborhood observation. We settled at her breakfast table, and I began my carefully constructed explanation. I'm concerned about my family's motives for this visit, I said, letting weariness color my voice. Yesterday I overheard them discussing my finances in ways that made me uncomfortable. What kind of discussion? Medical evaluations, legal guardianship, taking control of my assets for my own protection. I made air quotes, watching her reaction. Goldie's expression hardened. Those vultures. I wondered why they showed up after all these years. You've been through something similar? My sister and her husband tried the same thing after Harold died. Wanted to move me to a retirement community, sell my house, manage my complicated finances. She snorted. Complicated? I'd been balancing checkbooks since before they were born. How did you handle it? Documentation, witnesses, legal counsel who understood predatory family dynamics. Her eyes gleamed with remembered victory. Want to know the beautiful part? They had to pay my attorney fees when the judge threw out their petition. I leaned forward conspiratorially. I may need to ask for your help in the coming days. What kind of help? Observation, testimony if necessary. These walls are thin. If they discuss their plans where you might overhear, I understand perfectly. Goldie's smile turned predatory. My hearing is excellent for a woman my age. Returning home, I found the family exactly where I'd left them. Ward hunched over his laptop at the dining table, probably researching guardianship laws. Fern read on the terrace, stealing glances at the ocean that would soon be part of her inheritance. Or so she believed. Wiley played video games in the living room, the only innocent among them. I spent the afternoon strategically placing documents where they'd be discovered. Investment statements showing the full scope of my wealth. Legal documents from previous estate planning sessions. Medical records proving my perfect cognitive function. Each piece of paper was positioned to build their confidence while providing evidence of their calculating behavior. By evening, I'd prepared my counterattack. Tomorrow, the real performance would begin. But tonight, I had one more role to play. The grateful grandfather, overwhelmed by family complexity, desperately needing their help. Ward had given me the perfect script during his morning confessions. Now, I would perform it flawlessly. The next morning brought my Oscar-worthy performance. I shuffled into the kitchen at 8, wearing yesterday's shirt and slippers that didn't match. My hair remained uncombed, and I'd practiced a slight tremor in my left hand. "Good morning, everyone," I said, squinting at the coffee maker as if it were a puzzle requiring advanced engineering degrees. "Morning, Papa," Fern said, immediately rising to help. "Let me get that for you." "Such a complex machine," I muttered, stepping back with manufactured confusion. "Eleanor always handled the coffee. I never learned all these buttons." Ward observed from the breakfast counter, taking notes in his mental playbook. I could practically see him calculating. If I couldn't operate a coffee maker, managing investment portfolios must be impossibly overwhelming. "Abner, you seem a bit scattered this morning," he said with practiced concern. "Everything all right?" I paused, as if gathering scattered thoughts. "I've been trying to understand those papers Marcus sent. Investment allocations, tax implications, estate structures." I shook my head slowly. "It's all so complicated." "What papers?" Fern asked, right on cue. I gestured vaguely toward the study. "Somewhere in there. Pages and pages of financial terminology I don't recognize." Ward exchanged a glance with Fern, the look of hunters scenting wounded prey. "Maybe we could help," Ward suggested. "I have extensive experience with financial planning." "Would you?" Relief flooded my voice, carefully calculated to sound authentic. "I'd be so grateful. This is all beyond me now." The morning established the pattern. I asked Ward to explain simple banking terms I'd understood for decades. I needed Fern's help finding documents that were clearly labeled and organized. I expressed worry about managing all this money, as if wealth were a burden rather than a tool. Each performance element was calibrated for maximum effect. The trembling hands when handling papers, the confusion about dates that were clearly printed on statements, the gratitude when they offered to help with complex decisions. By afternoon, Ward had grown bold enough to suggest I might benefit from professional assistance. "There are specialists who help people in your situation," he said, voice smooth with false sincerity. "Financial advisors who understand the challenges of aging, medical professionals who can assess whether you're still capable of handling complex decisions." "You think I need that kind of help?" I asked, letting uncertainty quaver my voice. "It's just that you seem overwhelmed lately," Fern said gently. "Maybe it would be a relief to have experts manage the difficult stuff while you enjoy your retirement." "Family should help family," Ward added. "We could oversee the process, make sure you're protected from anyone who might try to take advantage." The irony was so thick I nearly laughed, but I maintained the performance, nodding gratefully at their concern. "I suppose you're right. This is all too much for someone my age." That evening, as we finished dinner, I played my final scene of the day. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told them, setting down my wine glass with slightly shaking hands, "about getting help with these financial complexities." "And?" Ward leaned forward, unable to hide his eagerness completely. "Maybe you could look at some of the paperwork, help me understand what I should do?" "Of course," Fern said immediately. "We're family. That's what we're here for." I smiled gratefully, the lonely old man finally accepting help from his loving relatives. But behind that smile, I was counting down to their inevitable overreach. 2 days of perfect performance had led to this moment. I spent the afternoon preparing my most elaborate dinner yet. Eleanor's finest china gleaming under crystal chandelier light. Silver service polished to mirror brightness. Wine worth more than most people's monthly salary breathing in cut-glass decanters. The formal dining room had been transformed into a stage for the final act. Ward entered first, adjusting his tie with the confidence of a man about to close his biggest deal. His eyes swept across the opulent table setting, no doubt calculating the value of everything he'd soon control. Fern followed, wearing her best dress and a smile that mixed nervous excitement with guilty triumph. Wiley appeared last, confused by the ceremonial atmosphere, but drawn in by my apparent vulnerability. "This seems quite special, Papa," Fern said, accepting the wine I poured with slightly trembling hands, a tremor I'd perfected over the past few days. "It is special," I replied, settling into my chair with careful deliberation. "Tonight, I want to share something important with all of you." Ward leaned forward, his businessman's instincts fully engaged. "What kind of important?" I reached for the leather folder I'd positioned beside my plate, handling it with the reverence of a man approaching momentous decisions. Inside were documents Marcus had prepared specifically for this evening, legitimate legal papers that would serve my purposes perfectly. "I've been thinking about our conversations," I began, letting my voice quaver with age and emotion. "About legacy, about what happens to all this when I'm gone." "Papa, you don't need to worry about that now," Fern said, but her eyes were fixed on the folder. "Actually, I do." I opened the documents, revealing pages dense with legal terminology. "I've made an important decision about my will, my estate, everything I've built." The silence that followed was electric. Ward's breathing had changed subtly. Fern gripped her wine glass tighter. Even Wiley looked up from his phone, sensing the weight of the moment. "I want to rewrite everything," I continued, "to reflect how grateful I am for your presence, your care, your willingness to help an old man navigate these complex financial waters." Ward's mask of concern couldn't quite hide the triumph blazing in his eyes. "Abner, are you certain about this? It's such a tremendous responsibility." "I've never been more certain of anything." I pushed the documents toward him. "I want you to examine these papers, make sure everything looks proper. You understand business in ways I never have." As Ward's fingers traced the legal language, I watched the subtle changes in his expression, the tightening around his eyes as he processed the implications, the way his jaw clenched with barely contained excitement. "This is quite comprehensive," he said carefully. "I consulted with several attorneys," I explained. "They assured me these arrangements would protect the family's interests while ensuring proper management of the assets." Fern reached across to touch my hand. "Papa, we're so grateful for your trust." The word trust hung between us like a blade. If only they knew how perfectly they'd walked into my trap. "There's just one thing," I said, retrieving another folder from beside my chair. "Some final paperwork we need to handle tomorrow, a formal signing ceremony." Ward nodded eagerly. "Of course, whatever you need." I smiled at them all, the grateful patriarch surrounded by his loving family, ready to hand over his life's work to their capable hands. Tomorrow, they would discover exactly what kind of paperwork they'd be signing. The next afternoon, I arranged chairs in my study with the precision of a theater director. Family photographs lined the shelves like silent witnesses, and my desk held 2 folders, one they expected, one they didn't. Ward arrived first, dressed in his best suit as if attending a board meeting. Fern followed, clutching her purse with nervous energy. Wiley slouched in last, still unclear about the proceedings, but sensing their importance. "Shall we begin?" I asked, gesturing to the chairs arranged in a semicircle facing my desk. Ward nodded, his eyes bright with anticipation. "This is a significant moment, Abner. We want you to know how honored we are by your trust." "Trust," I repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, let's discuss trust." I reached for the first folder, the one they expected to contain revised will documents. Instead, I withdrew a single sheet of paper and placed it before them. "Before we proceed," I said calmly, "I thought you might like to review the transcript of a conversation recorded 2 mornings ago." Ward's confident expression faltered slightly. "Transcript?" "From your bedroom," I continued, my voice steady as steel. When you thought I was sleeping. I watched the color drain from Fern's face as she read the first few lines. Ward snatched the paper, his eyes racing across the damning text of their private plotting session. "Where did you get this?" Ward demanded, his charm evaporating. I smiled and activated my phone's speaker. Their voices filled the room, Ward's cold calculation, Fern's nervous compliance, the detailed discussion of medical evaluations and financial guardianship designed to strip away my autonomy. "He's clearly losing his edge," I quoted, along with Ward's recorded voice. "Perfect timing for us to step in." Fern's hand flew to her mouth. "Papa, that's not... We didn't mean... We need him dependent on us, grateful for our help," I continued, now quoting Ward. "Let him convince himself this is his idea." Ward stood abruptly, his businessman's composure cracking. "You recorded us illegally. In my own home, with guests discussing plans to defraud me? Perfectly legal, Ward. I consulted with my attorney." The second folder came out now, thick with documentation. Phone records showing 10 years of ignored calls. Returned letters with addressee unknown stamps. Photographs of holidays spent alone. Birthdays without cards. The systematic evidence of abandonment. "Shall we discuss the real timeline?" I asked conversationally. 37 moves in 10 years. Each time I sent updated contact information. Each time my letters came back undelivered. Each time you chose to disappear rather than maintain family relationships. Fern was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "We were busy. We were struggling." "Struggling?" I opened my laptop, displaying Ward's social media feed. Vacation photos, expensive restaurant check-ins, business conference updates from luxury hotels. "This kind of struggling?" Ward's face had gone from pale to red with desperate anger. "What do you want from us?" "Want?" I stood slowly, no longer the frail old man they'd been manipulating. "I want you to understand something, Ward. I spent 4 decades building financial expertise. I advise Fortune 500 companies on strategic planning. Did you really think I couldn't see through your amateur manipulation?" The study door opened, and Goldie entered with perfect timing. "I heard everything from next door," she announced cheerfully. "These walls are terribly thin, aren't they? I do hope you don't mind that I've been documenting your visit for my own peace of mind." Ward whirled to face her. "Who are you?" "A witness," she replied simply, "and someone who's seen this exact scheme attempted on elderly neighbors before." Wiley, who had been silent through the revelations, finally spoke. "Grandpa, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what they were planning." I looked at the boy, the only innocent among them, the only one capable of genuine remorse. "I believe you," I said gently. The room fell silent except for Fern's quiet sobbing and the distant sound of ocean waves through the windows. Ward made one last desperate attempt at control. "None of this matters. We can explain everything. Family misunderstandings, that's all." I opened the final section of my evidence folder. "Can you explain this?" The documents spilled across the desk. Credit reports showing their massive debts. Loan applications listing my assets as collateral without my knowledge. Emails between Ward and bankruptcy attorneys discussing asset seizure strategies. "You researched my finances thoroughly," I said, voice cutting through his protests. "Investment portfolios, property values, insurance policies. You knew exactly what you were hunting." Fern looked up through her tears. "Papa, we were desperate. Desperate enough to convince your own son his grandfather was mentally incompetent? Desperate enough to plan medical evaluations to document cognitive decline I don't actually have?" I turned to Wiley, whose teenage face showed the dawning understanding of his family's true nature. "Your grandmother Eleanor died 3 years ago," I told him gently. "She spent her final months hoping you'd visit, that she'd meet her only grandchild. Your parents never even told you she existed." Ward's composure finally shattered completely. "You self-righteous old fool. Do you have any idea what it's like trying to survive in this economy? Trying to provide for a family while business contracts disappear and bills pile up?" "I know exactly what it's like," I replied coldly. "I also know the difference between asking family for help and planning to steal their assets through legal manipulation." I stood, moving to the window overlooking the Pacific. 10 years of pain, 10 years of abandonment had led to this moment. "You want to know what I've decided about my estate?" I asked, turning back to face them. Every penny goes to educational scholarships in Eleanor's name, except for one provision. Wiley looked up hopefully. A college fund for my grandson, I continued, managed by trustees until he reaches 25, provided he maintains no contact with the parents who tried to use him as a weapon against his grandfather. Ward exploded. You can't do that! We'll contest it! With what money? Goldie asked sweetly. And what lawyer would take a case where the plaintiffs are on record planning to defraud the deceased? Fern's sobs had turned to quiet acceptance. We lost everything, didn't we? You lost what you never deserved to have, I said simply. Moving to my desk, I retrieved a final envelope. Bus tickets back to wherever you came from. Your suitcases are packed and waiting by the front door. Ward's face twisted with rage and desperation. This isn't over. Yes, I said with absolute finality. It is. 30 minutes later, I watched through my study window as their taxi disappeared down the coastal highway. Goldie stood beside me, her hand resting supportively on my shoulder. Feel better? She asked. I considered the question. 10 years of abandonment had been answered. Justice had been served. But victory came with its own emptiness. I'd proven my point, but lost my family forever. I feel complete, I said finally. Outside, waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore. Inside, silence settled over my house like peace after war. For the first time in a decade, I was exactly where I belonged, alone but undefeated, wealthy but unburdened, free to live my remaining years on my own terms. The phone rang. Wiley's name appeared on the display. I answered on the third ring. Grandfather? His voice was small but determined. Can we talk? I smiled, looking out at the endless Pacific horizon. We have all the time in the world. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.